Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have all of you here today. And I am excited to have a certified nutrition coach with us today. Her name is Charlene Dash. And I got to know Charlene in a kind of interesting way. I interviewed her husband, Daryl, about his new book, Eight Habits for Christian Growth, on a Christian Habits podcast. And he talked in that interview about some habits his wife had learned in the kind of the eating department. I thought, oh, she'd be an interesting person to interview. Then I also had a reader write and say, oh, you should interview her. So here we are on the phone, and just welcome to the podcast, Charlene. It's good to have you.
Hi, thank you so much, Barb. It's great to be here.
Well, why don't you begin by just telling us a little about yourself?
Okay, well, probably if I were to go back about 12 years ago, I'd spent a lot of years leading up to that point on everyone.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
When I say tell you a little bit about yourself, first just tell a little bit about who you are, and then I'll ask about that.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My bad.
So let's just start by telling us, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Charlene?
Okay, well, thank you, Barb. I'm a certified nutrition coach and also a Revelation Wellness fitness instructor. And so I enjoy and love spending time with people who are interested in learning more about and taking the next steps in eating a bit better and taking care of their bodies and moving a bit more and just experiencing more of what God has for them.
That's great. And are you just doing that from a intellectual perspective, or is this something that you have struggled with yourself?
Oh no, this is me sort of in my own story. So about 12 years ago, I found myself in a place where for a lot of years, I'd been caring for everyone and everything except my own body. I'd found rhythms for my relationship with God and family and ministry and work, but I'd accumulated a lot of bad behaviors and habits that were detrimental to my health. I skipped meals, I was inconsistent with sleep, physically very inactive, and I experienced significant weight gain over probably about 20 years. And so I had some early signs of preventable disease. And so that was really pushing at me to, make some changes. But the thing that really turned things around was one day I was trying to kneeboard, and I knew how to water ski in my youth. And so I knew what I should be able to do, but my body couldn't do it. And so as I was being literally pulled around the lake on a board that I couldn't move on, I think that was the pull that I needed to go along with the push. And I just love the way God works, because, he gives us he communicates these things with us. He lets our bodies communicate that things are not right. But he doesn't just leave us there with what's not right. And so it was very shortly after that I had a connection with an online nutrition coaching company through the work that I did as an accountant. And it was as I spent time with that company and then was introduced to their coaching program that I began to learn through their coaching program how to build some habits and skills to take care of my body. And God has just used that to transform me in so many ways.
Wow. Yeah. And Charlene told me beforehand how much weight you lost and how long you've kept it off for. I can't remember. What was that?
Yeah. So I've lost in total 75 pounds.
Wow.
It was a long journey over about 12 years. Now I didn't lose everything all at once. I would lose maybe 15 to 20 pounds in a year. And then I'd maybe take a break and sort of stay at that weight for a year. And then the next year I might lose another 15 or 20 pounds or whatever, or 10 pounds, like it was, it's been a slow progress in the right direction. I'm at a weight now where I'm not looking to lose any more weight at this point.
Okay. Yeah. You look great. And how long have you kept your weight off now? For how many years?
So it's been 12 years altogether that I've been doing this. And I think the great thing for me has been that the habits have just been progressive. It's not like I do them for a period of time. It's like, these are skills that I'm building that I want to keep doing because I feel my best when I'm actually living these out. So it's not hard to keep going with it.
Well, yeah. And I think it's really interesting the way you lost it, where you lose 10 to 15 pounds, then a year off, then 10 to 15 pounds a year off. I would guess if you lose it that way, I mean, both ways are good. I'm sure like all of us who are listening who want to lose weight, we'd rather lose it right in a row. But was there any benefits of losing it like that?
I think the biggest benefit for me was that it was at a pace that I could sustain. Not so, it wasn't about the physical stuff, it was about my capacity. Because losing weight and spending time, like being intentional and practicing new habits, that takes a tremendous amount of energy. And so sometimes life just doesn't give us that much margin, like things come up. Sometimes, you can have a difficult year, whether it's with kids or with parents or, your own health concerns or work issues or, COVID, right? Like there's all different things that come up that make life challenging. And sometimes we just have to be okay with the fact that we can continue the good habits that we have, but maybe this isn't a time for us to try and be making a whole bunch of changes, because maybe we need to just allow this season to be what it is, and focus on maintaining what we've already gained rather than pushing ourselves and then collapsing under the weight of it. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, why don't you tell us about some of the habits you learned?
Sure. Yeah. I think like the great thing is that it was the focus of the habits that I learned was always progressive, to take the next step that you're able to do. And so it would start small with something like very tangible, like, eat lean protein at every meal. And so you just think about, okay, and they give you, provide some suggestions of types of proteins that are healthier than others, but it was always on a spectrum. So you could choose, well, right now I'm eating, chicken fingers that are manufactured. So maybe a better step is to, buy some chicken breast or something like that, right? Like, so you can choose your own progression and move towards healthier. But so some of them were practical nutrition steps, like eating lean protein at each meal, eating vegetables at each meal. So for me, like breakfast became well, what do I do with eating vegetables at breakfast, and thinking that through. And so now, I've chosen to often have a salad with my breakfast, for example, so that I'm getting the vegetables that I need to be getting at each meal.
I think that seems really interesting, because I know before the podcast, Charlene told me that really it was more of an intuitive eating approach, this program. And usually when I think intuitive eating, I don't hear things like eat vegetables at each meal or lean proteins. I feel like I like eat whatever you feel like eating. So that's kind of interesting to me. That seems a little bit different.
Yeah, it's there's certainly freedom, but I think initially, especially if the assumption is that if someone wants to lose weight, what you want to try to do is get them used to consuming, I guess, like nutrient dense foods with the meals that they eat. So there's freedom, but there's also, like, it's not like you have to do it at every single meal, but you're encouraged to try to do it at every single meal and just see how that works.
Right. So, which is super helpful, because I mean, overall for life, we do want to have healthy habits, and healthy food is helpful. Like the older you get, I'm 61 now. It makes a big difference how healthy you eat. So I love that they incorporate that into the habits. That's good. Okay. Do you have another one for us?
Yeah. So, and another one along the same line would be, staying hydrated. I think typically within North America, our diet tends to be water impoverished oftentimes. And so just practicing for a couple of weeks of staying hydrated. And then a follow-up to that later on in the program was, a challenge to, can you take another step with that? And so for me, the step that I chose to do was I did a 2-week test to see what it was like to drink 0 calories. And it was interesting because I was about 8 months into the program at that point, in that particular time that I went through it. And my weight loss had stalled. And the only thing I was doing is I had a couple drinks a week that were not like that had calories in them, right? Like maybe 2 at the most 3. And I thought, oh, like, okay, like I'll cut them out. They're not necessary. They're fun, but not necessary. And, it was immediately after that after that 2-week period where I lost another 1.5 pounds. And then, my body started to lose weight again, right? Like just from that simple change. Now we're all different. It doesn't mean that if you just, cut out all calories, that's going to work for everyone. But it's just interesting to experiment, which actually brings up one of the habits that I think was really helpful to me in the program. And that is that I learned to cultivate a growth mindset by things like thinking on a continuum. So instead of all or nothing, black and white thinking, allowing freedom to make a small change that's in the right direction, that's slightly progressive. And another one was like reframing obstacles. And another one was honestly learning to play, just giving myself permission to play and or experiment with something for a short period of time, and then observing what happened. And so that spirit of being inquisitive and learning more about my own body was certainly a habit that, and it spills over into so many other areas of life, right? And by nature, I think I tend to not be that way. And so it was really helpful for me to learn that behavior and that practice of being more open to trying something different and just observing without getting down on myself, because I have a habit of getting down on myself pretty easily. And so learning to step back from that and say, no, like what's this telling me? What is this good for? Because it's giving me information. And so let's focus on the information that I'm receiving rather than condemning myself.
So the interesting thing about that is I can see how that would help if you are, trying to lose weight, you're doing really great following your boundaries, and then all of a sudden you have a day where you blow it. So it seems like all those things you talked about, black and white thinking, learning to play, sit back and observe. And I can't remember what was that middle one that helped with that too.
The reframing obstacles.
Oh yeah, reframing. So how would you use those 3 habits? I imagine you had days when you totally blew it and either binged or ate way too much. Did you have some of those days?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then you feel gross, like physically and emotionally, right? Like, yeah. And one of the expressions that helped me so much was they called it wipe the slate clean. And the thing that struck me, Barb, as I thought about that is how much that's a gospel grounded and rooted phrase, that is exactly what Christ has done for us. And that's the reality that we want to embrace for every aspect of our life every day. But I had never associated that with my eating, that I can wipe the slate clean. And as a Christian, I can wipe the slate clean because Christ has wiped it clean for me. And, when you get that combination, like it's just so powerful in terms of just recognizing that even in my eating, that there's glory that can go to Christ and what he has done for me in that, right? And that when I choose to surrender and submit that, that's there for me. So that was really powerful. It's still work. Like submitting to that is still work, right? It doesn't just happen, but it is a practice that I do practice now, and I am so grateful for. And I know it's something that you mentioned with Daryl's book, and it's something that he, has mentioned and he's made use of as well, because it's just so valuable to see it beyond just the spiritual level. We're so good at seeing that when it relates to maybe a relational sin or something where we feel we've offended God, but just bringing that into our body takes it to a different place, I think.
So what does that look like on a practical level? So say, last night you binged. I know we're talking, years and years ago, because I'm guessing you don't do that anymore. But what would you do the next morning, just on a practical level? Because usually the next morning we're like, oh, beating yourself up and thinking I'll never get over this, and like, oh, why bother? And then eating the rest of the day. So what would you do in a practical level to practice all those little habits you talked about?
So the first thing I would do is I would do my best to walk myself through that. And I find that I have some questions that I keep, that I've been accumulating, like in my journal and my quiet time with the Lord, that I use just to remind myself of, are there things, what am I holding on to? What am I, what's overwhelming me, or just different questions, right? Reflection questions. And so I'll try to work some of that out with the Lord, but I'll be honest, Barb, sometimes I need to hear it from someone else. And so it's so valuable to me to have, whether it's my husband or others who are also thinking in a similar way as me, speaking those words over me, or reading them from someone else, whether it's from a blog article or hearing it on a program like your program, which is excellent, right? And so just being encouraged. And so building some of those supports in, so that it's not just all on me, that it's not just because when we're alone and isolated, then it's very hard to, I think we're not designed for that. We're designed to have a supportive environment around us. And so one of the habits that I was encouraged to build as part of the coaching program looked at, who's on your team, right? And intentionally adding voices, whether it was through online content that I'm absorbing, or whether it's through, personal relationships, or through a coach or whatever, but adding those supportive things to my environment to help me stay and get back on track. Because you're right, when we get thrown off, oftentimes we need a helping hand back up.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's great. So, I know you talked beforehand about how you'd start a new habit every 2 weeks, which seems interesting, because I'm sure everybody's listening to all these habits and we're thinking, oh, super great habits, but might be a little overwhelming. So you just like start one, 2 weeks later, start another one. How would you know which one to start?
That's a really good question. So at the time when I went through the program, the habits were prescribed. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't like I chose them or, had any control over them. I will say that I now provide similar coaching to people, and we go through a lot of this content, but it's client directed. And so on the intake, you go through a whole bunch of questions, a lengthy questionnaire, and that questionnaire then sort of becomes the basis of where are potentially some good places for you to start. And then it's a conversation, right? And so, and then each step of the way, there's options to, you don't have to start a new habit after 2 weeks, you could say, you know what, I want to keep doing this habit for another 2 weeks, or 4 weeks, or whatever it is, until you're ready to, or you feel at a place where you want to add something else on. So it's I think it's in some ways maybe a better fit for clients now, to take them through it that way. I like that part of it. So when I went through it, though, it was just like you either kept up or you sort of checked out for a couple of weeks, right? And did your own thing a little bit or whatever. But checking out wasn't a good strategy, because then it's really hard to get back in.
Yeah.
What was much more helpful was that I would just do what I could. And so if actually, because I did have the freedom to break it down as small as I could actually manage. And so maybe for that week or 2 weeks, maybe all I could do was just actually, look at the content and read through it and think about it, and think about what would that look like for me. And so just giving myself grace, to do what I could, but not expect myself to be a superstar. And I think it was helpful as well, because they would provide some different suggestions depending on where you might be at, right? And so I think that was helpful. But certainly that was part of the reason why I just allowed myself to do it over several years, as opposed to trying to do everything all at once, because for me, I just didn't feel like I had the margin to do everything all at once. Some
Right.
people did. Some people lost 75 pounds in 1 year, but that wasn't me, because I just didn't have that much capacity.
Yeah. And I would think
mentally,
anybody,
emotionally.
anybody who's listening, you've already said, a whole list of habits. And I don't know if you'll have any more to tell us, but you could look at that whole list, and I don't know if you're going to do it like with a friend, would you start with the easiest one or the one that would be most impactful?
That's actually the very choice that I give my clients now. And I let them pick, because they're in the best position to be able to assess what fuels them. Some people want a challenge and they want the big success, and they're ready, and they're able, and they're willing to do what needs to be done to really make that happen. Other people are like, maybe they're feeling hesitant or insecure, or or maybe they just don't have a lot of time and capacity, but this is important to them and they want to get started. And so then we might look for an easy win, something that is very doable and might not make a huge difference in terms of weight right away, but at least now they've turned a corner and they're going a new direction, and they can feel good about what they're actually doing, right? And so I really feel that each of us as people are probably best able to sort of know what it is that we're going to gravitate to.
Great. Okay. Well, we don't have too long left, but do you have any more habits you wanted to share?
Yeah, a couple that were hard, and even now can still be a challenge for me, and I still have to walk myself through them. And I don't do them perfectly, but the two big ones I think would be eat slowly and eat till you're satisfied about you're not quite full. You're maybe only about 80% full, but you're full enough that you're not hungry. And those two things put together, and of course, you can't know the second one unless you're eating slowly, right? If you eat too quickly, then you overeat, because your body needs that 20 minutes to get the signal that it's getting full, right? So the eating slowly comes first, and so that's one, and that's one where you actually need, if you're living with other people and eating with other people, sometimes the biggest part of that is having honest conversations with those people that you want them to also try to do that with you, because if they're all eating quickly, it's going to be very difficult for you to eat slowly if you're eating together. So yeah, again, coming back to building your support environment. Another big one for me is I did a kitchen clean out as part of, what I was doing, and just keeping my environment filled with the healthy choices that I want to make, rather than bringing in, whether it's bags of cookies or chips or whatever it is that we like to eat, right? And I just don't keep them in the house very often. And when people try to give them to me, like leftovers and that kind of thing, I'm like, we do not need those in our home, And but again, that can involve conversations with other people that you live with, and sometimes you have to navigate those things and work them out, right? Because not everybody might be at that place in terms of what your home environment is. So
yeah, and the funny thing is, a lot of times, as far as everybody giving over the leftovers, like nobody wants those things in their house, and so that's
right.
why everybody's trying to give them away.
Yeah. And and honestly, like making a choice to say, like, we can put this in the garbage, like we've eaten what we want and that's enough, and so we got what we wanted from what we paid for it, right? And so we don't have to finish it. And I think that's a hard thing sometimes to sort of get our heads around. Some people are better at that than others. For me, that takes work.
Right, but so valuable, because you still have gotten your full enjoyment
right.
out of it, and then if you throw it away, at least you're not getting the negative consequences out that could. And sometimes we don't have to throw away, and other times we just know we do, or we will eat every single ounce before we go to bed that night, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's good. So what advice would you give to the person who's listening right now, and they're the 75 pounds ago you, and they're listening thinking, oh, this all sounds great and promising, but I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. It sounds overwhelming. What advice would you give to that person?
I would say, first of all, for sure, it's possible. And what you want is someone who's going to be supportive and encouraging and, walk with you through it. That it doesn't have to be overwhelming. If you're looking at things and they seem overwhelming, that what you want is to find a program where you're able to decide for yourself what your next step is going to be, so that it's not overwhelming, because you're in control. Like, you're able to say, this is what I can handle doing. And yet there's someone there who, sometimes we need to be challenged a little bit too, right? Like sometimes we can do a little bit more than we think we can. And other times we need someone to come alongside and say, that seems like you're kind of struggling with that, maybe. Like, do you think maybe doing a little less would actually be more successful, right? And so just getting that feedback from someone who's going to be supportive, I think is really important.
Okay. And what if you're a person who, you don't really have anybody, you don't have any support, you can't afford a program? What advice would you give that person?
There are, quite a few resources available online. I think there's certainly some good resources. I know, Barb, you've got some resources available in print and on your program and through like your blog and this program. Like, there are definitely resources available. And then I would encourage you to strike up a conversation or reach out to someone who has maybe done something. Like, if you have a friend who's lost some weight, talk to them about it. Just ask them their story, because I think sometimes we feel intimidated we don't want to sort of say too much to some people sometimes or whatever, or let them know what we're thinking. But if we just ask people what their story is, then I think that helps us to maybe build a support network of people who are interested in what we're interested in. And that's a good place to start. And oftentimes they'll have references and resources that they know of and that they can share with you, and you'll be able to find things that help to encourage you along the way.
Good. That sounds great. And where can everybody find you online, Charlene, if they want to, if they're interested in coaching or help from you, where could they find you?
Yeah, so my website is live move be well .online. So it's all one word: live move be well, and then .online.
Okay, so they can find you there. And
Yeah.
the name of the program you went through, I can include that in the blog post too. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something you use or.
Yeah. So I went through precision nutrition,
Mhm.
and I am certified as a nutrition coach now through them as well, a level 2
Okay.
coach with them. And I use in my own coaching practice, I still use their content in terms of the practices and the skills that we work on. But as a coach, of course, I can bring that perspective of being a Christ follower into the conversation as well. And so I know that with the clients that I've worked with, they've really appreciated that as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you so much for being on the program, Charlene. It's just so helpful to learn all the great help you have to offer. I just really appreciate having you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Barb. It's been a real privilege.
Good. And thank you all of you for taking the time out to listen today and be with us. I pray that you have a wonderful week following God and following your boundaries. And I will talk to you next time.